Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni miliwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you would join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. We have two fantastic guests for you today. Zoe Twitt will be here to celebrate Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad. And later in the show, Master Chef Abi Balingit will be here to teach us how we can have fun in the kitchen with our kids. Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's New Job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's New Job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with the Kids Certified Great Read program. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Virginia Beach in Virginia. I love Virginia Beach. It is such a wonderful place. I have such great memories of the city. Our guest is here today to celebrate two brand new books, Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad, and Adelaide on Broadway. Please welcome to the show the author, Zoe Twitt. Hey, Zoe, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm delighted to have you on, delighted that we had a chance to talk a little bit about Virginia Beach and a little bit about your native Australia, and I can't wait for us to talk about Adelaide.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. So tell us first about Adelaide. Who is this young person that we're going to meet in the books?
So, the real Adelaide is actually my niece who's grown up. She's 15 years old now. And so I created this series of books, based on her. She's sort of this like swashbuckling child, who loves adventure. But, there's also, a little bit of anxiety there. So the series of books is based on Adelaide, who loves adventure, but she needs to overcome some of these anxieties every now and then.
Yeah. I think for a lot of kids, I think for a lot of adults, the biggest challenge that they face anytime they take on an adventure is getting over the anxiety that they might feel.
Absolutely. And it's really a normal part of living. And I think it's something that's something that we don't address all the time. Everybody gets anxious. Everybody gets, depressed. We have these feelings. So we just need tools to work through them.
It's interesting because one of the things that I've noticed now, we've been publishing the podcast now for 6 years. I'm doing my math, 6 years. And we've noticed that the number of books that are talking about anxiety has really increased over the years. And, we hear more and more that there are more and more kids dealing with anxiety. And I'm wondering, from your point of view, do you actually think there are more kids dealing with anxiety, that it's a bigger problem, or is it just something that we're acknowledging and that we're dealing with because we weren't willing to deal with it before?
I think both, even though that can't really be an answer. But I think we were always, a little anxious. And I think that we didn't always identify it because we didn't talk about mental health, and now it's kind of like suddenly a hot topic. But I also think post-pandemic and with, the rise of social media, there is a rise in anxious children and teens.
That makes perfect sense. I loved technology when I was growing up, and granted, technology when I was a kid almost 100 years ago was very different, very different than what it is right now. But every piece of technology I could get my hand on, I loved and I exploited and explored and got into trouble with sometimes. I can't imagine what it would be like if I could reach into my pocket and pull out this little rectangular thing that would give me the power to make videos and audio and to send messages around the world in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and I think, I think a lot of the issue is when we're on social media and we feel like we're connecting to other people, it's a sort of faceless connection. So we can say anything, we can be anyone, and I think people really exploit that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of meanness and there's not a lot of compassion. And I think that's, a little bit of a dangerous thing for our kids. They don't have that human connection. They're not learning, social skills in the same way.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Mike Tyson has a quote that I won't share because it's rather adult. But basically it comes down to, the biggest problem with social media is that people become way too comfortable talking smack behind the keyboard, knowing that there's no chance of them getting whacked for what they say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even if we know the people in reality and we're going to see them the next day, there just doesn't seem to be that same filter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I am not for violence, and, we should never settle our differences with a smack or whatever. But it's true. No, growing up knowing that, if I said something, there may be some real consequences for this. It kept me in check, and it kept me watching my mouth. And I don't, that doesn't exist for a lot of kids these days, for a lot of adults these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now tell me a little bit more about the real Adelaide, and also tell me what does she think about the fact that she's a star of these two picture books?
Well, I think she's a star in real life, so so I don't think it's really made any difference to her life at all. But and she's actually a way more brilliant writer than I am, and she's 15. So but I wanted to create something that was dear to me and felt very close. So, and I also have a son, and he's 8. So I think some of the themes are inspired by him as well. And what he's been going through, what he went through in the pandemic. Yeah. What a lot of kids went through.
We've kind of come out of the pandemic, and people have come out of it in various different ways. But one of the things that was always kind of on my mind, those 2 years that I spent kind of on house arrest, were a very small percentage of my life. The 2 years that your son spent in pandemic lockdown, the 2 years that your 15-year-old niece spent, they were much bigger chunks of their lives. And how do you think how is it still affecting them, and how long do you think that will be with them?
That's such an interesting question, and I wish I had an answer for it. Because I feel the kids are still in the aftermath of that. And the more I talk to other parents, the more I realize, all the kids need therapy, or a helping hand. I don't know. I think it might affect them their entire lives because, my son at the beginning of the pandemic was 4. that's very young. And we were locked down, I guess, for maybe a year, and schools were going in and out, and it was very disruptive for them. And I think that they missed out on a lot of, learning social skills and social interaction. So a lot of parents are telling me that they feel that their kids are behind, in terms of social skills.
And that makes perfect sense, because as we were just talking about, when you're not out there, when you don't have the experience to kind of learn those social skills, you don't learn them.
Yeah, I would love to see schools, really working on that.
Yeah.
But I think there's I've been reading that there is a dearth of therapists. You want to get into therapy, but there are no therapists for kids, because we have, so many kids in need.
Right. I don't think anybody ever anticipated that we'd have need for hundreds of thousands of kids to go into therapy all at the same time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of schools, and you've kind of had experience with a couple of different educational systems here. Your kids are here learning in the United States. I'm assuming that you grew up learning in Australia. I'm always curious about how, different school systems, different school experiences are in different parts of the world are the same, and how they differ.
Oh, well, I feel like the Australian school system and the US school system is very comparable. I had a pretty similar experience between the two, and I loved going to school in America. When we moved to America, I was 9, and it had just been my lifelong dream for those 9 years to move to America.
Oh, very cool.
So, yeah. So first we moved to New York, and I have to tell you, that was another world.
Moving from Boston to New York is another world.
Yes.
For
sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other worlds, Adelaide in the Cosmic Rescue Squad. Sounds like that rescue squad's coming from another world.
It is. So in the first book, Adelaide and her friends, they go trick-or-treating, and Adelaide's very excited about, picking up the candy. But then it gets dark, and she realizes that, her friends have gone on to the next house, and she's standing there on her own, and she experiences panic. And then she feels around in her pocket for a piece of paper that she found earlier that was a spell written in crayon. And it says, if you need help, read this spell. So she reads the spell. And a little tiny witchlet appears. And the witchlet is, about the same age as the children. And she arrives and she says, I'm here to help anyone who's afraid of the dark tonight. But then Adelaide's friends arrive back at that moment, and she says, well, I don't really need you now, my friends are back, but I am afraid of the dark. And the witchlet says, well, that's fine, because I have, tons of kids on this list. The list is growing. You sort of see the list is, is like coming out of a machine. It's growing along the page. And the kids say, well, why don't we help? Because this is a giant list, and, there are a whole group of us. So the witchlet teaches them to imagine a golden bubble filled with light, and they rise into the sky and they steer that golden bubble around the universe, and they go to rescue children. But they say, we need to find a faster way because the list is still growing. So they knit a golden blanket, and they drape the blanket first over their town, and then over their country, and then over the entire world. And then when they're satisfied that all the children have enough light, it's time for bed.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I love that. And when Adelaide goes to Broadway, is she going to be up on stage?
Yes, and that's her life dream. She's always wanted to be on Broadway. And I have to say, I think this book is just me reparenting myself, because I always wanted to be an actress when I was a child. But when I actually got onto stage and I was in 5th grade and I was the star of the show, I got up there and in the middle of the play, I just blanked and I completely forgot my lines. And I remember just staring out into the audience, and I stared at the gym teacher. I don't know why I was fixated on her. And she said from the audience, I'm sorry, sweetie. I can't help you. like, why would you say that? And just that kind of terror and fear I took with me for the rest of my life. So every time I perform, I have this feeling of dread. Am I going to forget my lines? Am I not going to, have something interesting to say? So I created this book kind of for myself, for my inner child.
Oh, that's...
Yeah.
Well, I want to share with you, as somebody who's made my living on stage for over 30 years, there have been a number of occasions when I've been up on stage and completely forgotten what I was going to say. And thankfully, I had the experience and the comfort to say to the audience, I forgot what I was supposed to say. Let me go in a different direction.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to, and that's actually in the book. That's a really good point. That's in the book. In the book, they say, like, nobody noticed that you forgot your lines. Nobody noticed. And if, you just kind of seamlessly blend it in and nobody will notice. And besides, the grown-ups will think it's cute. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Yeah. And it all turns out okay in the end. I mean, they're not perfect because they're children and they've made mistakes, but it's okay.
Yeah. One of the greatest questions I love, anytime I'm answering questions after a show, a kid will ask me, have you ever made a mistake on stage? And I'll always answer, I've never done a show where I didn't make a mistake. And did you notice the one I made today? No, good. It's okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, this is really, really cool. I think that these are two really fun books that families are going to love reading together and talking about. And I hope people who are listening remember what you said about Adelaide, that you think that she's a star already. When I asked you what she thought about being the star of these picture books, and you said, well, she's already a star. And I hope that that's something that we can all, as parents, remember to help our kids always feel like they are the star, whether it's of a book or of a play or just of my day today.
Absolutely. I think that's great messaging.
Yeah. Hey, tell everybody, please, where they can go to find out more about Adelaide and her different adventures.
You can go to my website, enchantedpress.co.uk.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad and Adelaide on Broadway, two great books coming from our friend Zoe Twitt. Hey, Zoe, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Join us right now from the beautiful borough of Brooklyn in New York City. Our guest is here today to celebrate the joys, the wonders, how much fun it can be cooking with our kids. Please welcome to the show, Abi Balingit. Hey, Abi, how are you?
Thank you so much, Jed, for having me. This is so wonderful to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on. This cooking with your kids, that is something that I absolutely loved to do with my kids. They're adults now. I still love to do it now. My daughter's fiance comes over, and anytime we're grilling, it's like we're both there manning the grill together. And there's something about cooking with your kids that is really bonding, I think.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much play there and experimentation where you do learn so much about yourselves and your history just by being able to be in the kitchen together.
Yeah, and that creativity that you're talking about is, I think that's one of the things that people are afraid to do when it comes to cooking, especially if they're playing with a recipe. There's nothing that says that you have to draw within the lines. You can take a recipe and kind of add your own little flair to it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally 100% agree with that. And I always kind of recommend people to, whenever you have a recipe, it's like you hope the best, scientifically, especially with baking, you want the, ratios to be right. But with flavor, there's so much there and color that you can add to something to make it completely almost different from what it was before. And so that's the beauty, I guess, of remixing desserts, as in my book title too. And
so before we get into the recipe, how did you get into cooking? How did you become this master chef?
Oh my gosh, well, thank you. I mean, I sometimes don't even consider myself a master chef or a pastry chef, but I'm a home baker, and I started baking when I was 13 years old, and I was self-taught for the most part. So I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I read a lot of baking blogs. And, I think it wasn't really until 2020, when everyone was baking at home and quarantine and the pandemic, that I really leaned into baking again. But this time kind of incorporating more Filipino flavors into my baking. And so I became really known for doing a lot of fusion baking, and I would sell my treats to donate for mutual aid organizations. And so there was just so much there where I was learning how to bake at scale and at volume, but also kind of tapping into my memories of being a kid and being home with my parents, who I missed a lot because they're in California and I'm in New York. And yeah, it was kind of something that steamrolled away, over Twitter. I found my literary agent, they found me, and I started writing this cookbook. And so it's out in the world. It was out, it came out February 28th, 2023 this year. So it's been a whirlwind of, just talking about the process, and it feels like yesterday that I started it, but now it's done, and it's a joy to be able to talk about it with you today.
Yeah. So remind everybody the name of your cookbook so we can check it out.
Yeah, it's called Mayumu, Filipino American Desserts Remixed.
Yeah. And, Filipino culture, I've a lot of friends, from the Philippines. In fact, the illustrator who's been creating the cover art for our magazine is a young woman from the Philippines, who's just incredibly talented. And from the Philippines seems like this really kind of magical place, this fusion of all these different cultures. There's Asian, there's Spanish, there's a huge American influence there. Can you just talk a little bit about that Filipino culture and what does it mean to you when you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much diversity there in Filipino food, so it is so hard to compose a very neat sentence to describe all of it. But I do want to say that there's just so much with, at least I guess my forte is mostly baking and desserts, but there's so much with the tropical environment that the Philippines is in, that there's amazing fruits. There's amazing different so many different types of vinegars even alone, that I think there's a lot of elements of sour, sweet, salty, and a little bit of spicy. I don't think where my parents are from. So from province to province, there's such different regional specialties that I think, some places have a bit more of a lean towards peppery things, but for my family, we don't really. But I think there's just so much where, with Filipino food, it's the culture is so much of sharing, and a lot of big families that, I've come from and a lot of my friends come from. And so, it's commonplace to, people love adobo. We have a lot of rice, we have a coconut. And so I know it's a lot of words here, but I think it's such a great mix of so much, I guess, bounty, of so much produce, of so much great stuff in the Philippines, that it's a joy to kind of translate those flavors to what we have here in America. So there's a lot of adaptation that, being Filipino American, we have to kind of swap in, swap out. For example, ube is so popular, and it's a purple yam, and it's kind of infiltrated the mainstream in here in the U.S. But it's so hard to find that in the actual pure form that it is, the actual tuber. So there's so much in my book that I use extracts and frozen versions of it, and also dehydrated versions of it, just to be able to kind of get that same flavor in what I'm making day to day.
Well, I'm getting hungry. So why don't we jump into it? What's the recipe that you're going to teach us that we can create with our kids today?
Okay, so the first recipe I'm going to go ahead and teach you about is matcha pastillas. And so it's a kind of a chewy milk candy. And traditionally it's done using Carabao milk and sugar, and you're cooking it and cooking it down until it's pretty much a chewy consistency. And normally it's shaped into balls, or sometimes even little logs. And then it's rolled up into cellophane or tissue paper. And it's just a nice sweet treat to have. And my recipe uses a little bit of matcha powder, so it kind of, takes the edge off a little bit of all the sweetness. But this is a really fun one because there's only, I want to say, 5 ingredients in here. And that includes whole milk powder, matcha powder, kosher salt, condensed milk, and granulated sugar. And so with this recipe, you're also not needing to bake it at all or cook it. Like I said, traditionally, that's how it's usually made. But using all these ingredients, you're essentially kind of making a Play-Doh type of consistency of a dough, and then separating that into each individual candy. And so first you start with your whole milk powder and matcha powder and kosher salt. So all these dry ingredients, and you sift it into a medium bowl. And after that, you go ahead and have someone hopefully open a can for you, which is the sweetened condensed milk. And then you go ahead and mix it into the bowl with a rubber spatula. And so a nice part about this is where you get your kids involved is maybe give them little gloves so their hands might not be too sticky. But if they're really into it, that's totally fine. And you can wash your hands after. But you're kneading the dough a little bit just to make sure that all the dry ingredients are incorporated, evenly within the dough. And this is just like a lot of, again, like literally edible Play-Doh. And once it's all fully incorporated, you're going to go ahead and scoop each, portion into like 1 tablespoon sized balls. And so I really like using a cookie scooper for this just because it's like the ease of not having to use another spoon to scrape out of a tablespoon measure. But that is someone else you can, I feel like I think of a kitchen so much of like, okay, hopefully you have multiple kids to do like this one station and this one assembly line. But someone is scooping, and another person can also be, like once you have that into each ball, I think there's around 32, that you can get out of this recipe. But you're basically going to, pick up each ball and then roll it into I guess I'm doing motions. I know you can't see it on the podcast, but you're taking one ball and between your palms, you're kind of lengthening it into a log. So the friction is, elongating the candy. And I usually like doing it to about 2.5 inches long, and about 1/2 inch wide for each one. But that is optional. Again, I think people have done it where it's just like a straight up ball, and that's totally fine. But it is kind of fun to have that like classic log shape. And then after that, someone else is like rolling that into the granulated sugar that you have set up in another small bowl. And they're ready to eat. They're basically done in like a matter of like 15 minutes of just like, from start to finish. But then another step that you can take it a little further so you can have it for packaged, to give away to friends. I like doing, squares of bright cellophane paper. Not paper, but just cellophane. Sorry, I was like cellophane. And it's just nice to kind of roll them inside. So you place it into the center of a square, and then you just like roll, and twist the ends. And so you have these candies to give out to people. And it's really, really great. Just like have them at room temperature for about a week, and you can, enjoy them up to that point. But it's a great recipe, I think, because it's so much fun to kind of just like use your hands and to kind of just feel the dough. And I think the bright colors, especially if you do end up using cellophane for wrapping, is just so enticing. And when you actually have the dessert, it's just like a very nice, creamy, milky, but also a nice, like, a great matcha flavor, which I enjoy a lot too.
Yeah. It sounds fun. It sounds perfect if your kids go to a school where they still allow you to bring things in from home. Those candies rolled up in the cellophane sound like it would be a lot of fun. There's no peanuts. I know there's milk. Some kids might have milk allergies. Let them know. And for me, if with my kids, forget the gloves. Just get your fingers in there because they can lick their fingers afterwards.
Yes, the natural, I guess, like, water is saliva if you need to lick your hands.
That's right. And then wash your hands before you start playing with it.
Wash your hands, maybe, yes. I think there's, like, a whole step that we're missing.
Especially if you're sharing it with the kids at school. But if it's just a family, no big deal. It's, we all share that anyways. Hey, I'd love for you to come back, share another recipe for us. But before we do, where can we go to find out more about you and find out more about your great cookbook?
Yes, so I actually have a blog, and it's called The Dusky Kitchen, and you can find my website there, theduskykitchen.com. But you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at The Dusky Kitchen. So you can also find Mayumu in all your local bookstores, but also, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. So I hope you can find the book there and share it with your family.
We've had a great time cooking with our friend Abi Balingit. Abi, thanks so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you, Jed. It's been a pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Gina Giordano. She's returning to the show to celebrate Otis, the trash-talking octopus. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Zoe Twitt. Please be sure to check out Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad. We also want to thank Abi Balingit. Please be sure to visit her website, theduskykitchen.com, for all sorts of great recipe ideas that we can create in the kitchen with our kids. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Soji Franklin, Ann O'Leary, Monica Rivera Sosa. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.